Hello, everybody. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Good evening. Welcome to the UnHerd Club. If this is your first time visiting us, then a very special welcome. Welcome to Westminster, the centre of the elite, the home of groupthink, but not here in this little lagoon that we've got in UnHerd, where we try to push back against herd mentality that can proliferate in these parts. A welcome too to everyone watching online. If you are not an UnHerd subscriber, then you will be cut off cruelly halfway through this. The only way to continue watching after that point will be to subscribe, which is very easy. The instructions will be just below in the description, so I would heartily recommend you do that so you can see the whole of this conversation tonight. Tonight, you probably already know our guest. Andrew Doyle is a political satirist. He captured hearts and minds on X with his creation, or perhaps abomination, Titania McGrath, a radical intersectionalist poet committed to feminism, social justice, and armed peaceful protest. Under this nom de plume, Andrew skewered political correctness and self-victimization of what has come to be called the woke culture wars, and he is the author of a new book, which isn't actually out yet. So if you buy one, which you can in the lobby behind you, you will be literally the first people in the world to read it. It is The End of Woke, a absolute tome charting the rise and fall of Western wokeness, which is what we're here to talk about tonight. But before we do, please welcome Andrew Doyle. Okay, so we're going to start very simply,
Yes.
or at least I hope simply, but it feels a little bit like we've got into a situation with the kind of boy who cried woke. Everything is woke now, whether that's, you know, yogurt or oat milk or jazz or polyamory. No matter where you look, you cannot move for things being called woke. What do you mean when you call something woke?
Yeah, it gets very annoying, doesn't it, that the word has so many definitions depending on who you speak to. So in the book, I do try and define it. Well, I go into at length the various aspects of what woke means and what its various philosophical backgrounds are. But in a sentence, I say it is a cultural revolution that seeks equity according to group identity through authoritarian means. And I think that basically covers it, because it is a kind of monomania about group identity. It is effectively imposing values on other people. And so it is actually a lot more serious than the oat milk vegan sausage roll kind of stories that you get. I mean, it's pretty much constant. So I think when people are using the word, some people are using it as a kind of snarl word. Some people are just using it as a kind of catch-all for the generalized insanity. So, for instance, Lady Hale this week saying that she's been speaking to some doctors and they've told her that biological sex doesn't exist. Now, that has been branded as woke. I would say avoid those doctors, by the way. I think that's quite important. I feel like if I went to those doctors, they might try and, I don't know, like ask me about my menstrual cycle or something like that. Yeah. Like, but that kind of thing is, but in a way that is frightening, because you've got people who are in positions of power, medical professionals, and a judge who was the president of the Supreme Court, now making these declarations that any moderately intelligent 6-year-old knows is false. So that, to me, is the more serious aspect. It sounds frivolous, but then at the same time, we have this kind of legitimation crisis. We have a crisis whereby people don't trust figures of authority, they don't trust academics, they don't trust politicians, they don't trust the media, because they're telling lies. They're saying things they don't really believe. There's absolutely no way that doctors or Lady Hale, in fact, thinks that there's no such thing as sex. But it is an utterance that is said. It's a kind of equivalent to saying 2 + 2 = 5. Everyone must go along with this. It's a kind of power grab, and people are kind of sick of it. And I think that fatigue is why I'm now in a position to write a book called The End of Woke without it sounding preposterous. I think it's now at least sounding plausible.
Okay, so let's just chart the kind of progressive groupthink that you're describing there, because we used to call it political correctness in the old days, and then it became woke. When? What was that moment? Was there any sort of like event, or did someone come up with that term, or when was that? Did that start to be used?
Yeah, but that's got a long history. I mean, the word woke used in this context goes back to sort of the black civil rights movements of the 20th century. It appears in a track by Leadbelly regarding the Scottsboro Boys. It then gets used by Erykah Badu, the singer, in the early 2010s for a song, Staying Woke.
to mean to be awake.
To be being alert to injustice, but particularly racism. And that's what it was used for, and that's what it meant. And it became complicated because the word was hijacked. Around 2015, by various sort of activist groups, you saw things like Jack Dorsey, who was the CEO of Twitter, on stage with a Stay Woke t-shirt. This word became embraced by writers at activist publications like The Guardian or The New Statesman. They started self-identifying as woke. And then there was another weird turn where people like me were describing these people as woke because they described themselves as woke. I thought I was being courteous. And they said, oh, this is a word you've invented to mock us.
A slur.
A slur. It's a slur that you've invented. I'm like, but how? You were calling yourself this like 5 minutes ago. Like, and now I can't call you this? This is insane. So then it became a snarl word that invented by the right, apparently, because they forgot that we have Google and we can check that they used to write about this and call themselves this thing. So then it got evolved again, and then a lot of people did start using it as a pejorative. And I've always been consistent on this. Like I wrote a book called Woke in the guise of Titania McGrath, but I was using it as a descriptive. Like, this is a descriptive, a shorthand for what is, let's face it, rather a sprawling, complicated idea, which I think is distinct from political correctness. Because I think that political correctness movement, you're talking about the sort of late 80s, early 90s, it was a kind of messy negotiation towards an improvement of the social contract so that, you didn't have casual racism or casual homophobia in everyday conversation. But things did go too far, and people did get fired or whatever for various comments that they said. But it wasn't quite the same. You didn't have this retributive cancel culture. You didn't have this public shaming. You didn't have people's lives completely obliterated. You didn't have the police acting as the kind of paramilitary wing of political correctness. But they do now. They'll knock on your door and say, you've got very Brexity books. And, we've got, you've misgendered this or that person, whatever it might be. So it's a very different ballgame. I think the authoritarian aspect to wokeness is the key. I think without that, it is just what we used to call political correctness.
So what happened in 2020? Because that feels that it was a kind of fulcrum moment, that something shifted, an axis was moved, and then suddenly it came full force, where perhaps before it might have been partially political correctness, partially kind of groupthink, but it was at least scattered and diffuse. Then suddenly it came together in 2020. Can you just explain what that moment was?
It's quite interesting if you look back, and I think people have amnesia about this, but if you look back to sort of the end of 2019, there was a slew of articles and people saying, is woke over? The sort of thing I'm saying now.
Maybe the
well, yeah, quite. I could be completely wrong and humiliated. But that's okay, that's fine. People have bought the book by then. But ultimately, you had that situation where everyone's saying, it's gone too far. We all knew it was going too far. And we all knew that, that all these encroachments on people's everyday lives were far too excessive. And we did think it was dying off. Then the pandemic hits, you have the lockdown, you have this kind of, people go a bit mad because they're at home with their partners who they like to avoid normally, and suddenly they're going crazy. Divorce rates after the pandemic were huge, weren't they? Because people actually got to know each other.
Terrible.
It's a terrible thing to do. Always keep your partner at a distance. And anyway, so that happened. And then, of course, you have the George Floyd moment, which I've written about in UnHerd today.
Yep.
Because that's really key. That's the sort of seismic shift where all of this explodes and you end up with the Black Lives Matter protests and riots going on. And then suddenly every institution is confessing to systemic racism. Suddenly you have this kind of cult-like need to declare fealty to something that you don't necessarily believe in. Everyone was posting black squares on their social media. I have a friend who is an actor who was told by her agent that unless she posted that black square on Instagram, she wouldn't be cast in any jobs anymore. So there was a real kind of pressure about this sort of stuff. Now, the premise of all of this stuff was sound insofar as racism still exists, racism still needs to be tackled. But this was something different. This was a sort of Foucauldian idea about power structures within society. All of a sudden, like you'd have Princeton University confessing to saying, we are a racist system. We have systemic racism.
All cops are bastards.
Or that kind of thing, exactly. So these sort of very blanket, unsubstantiated ideas suddenly become peddled as though they were truth. And we kind of lost a grip on reality. And it really spiraled then. And because of the nature of the woke movement, it's like a kind of hydra with many heads. It isn't just, it's about group identity first and foremost. So it isn't just about race. Once BLM started, and remember on BLM's website, which no one bothered to check when they were supporting all this stuff, it was talking about the need to dismantle the nuclear family, to queer society. It was all those other things as well. It's why when at the Tavistock clinic, the various members of staff, when they had an internal kind of group thing about BLM, they had the raised fist for BLM with a backdrop of the Progress Pride flag. The two things suddenly became conflated. And so now what you have is the sanctification of group identity for its own sake, to the extent where you have a group like Queers for Palestine, who it's an incoherent notion. You know, because if they had their parades I mean, we know this. If they go to Gaza and have those parades, they're not going to last very long, you know, and they know that. Or do they know that? I don't know. I
suppose, though, if you look back over the history of academia, intersectional academia, which has gone on for a lot longer than, 2020.
Yeah.
And also even movements like Occupy Wall Street.
Yes.
You probably would have seen lots of gay flags at Occupy Wall Street, people saying, we need to break down the heteronormative structure that has led to the bankers taking advantage of people. I'm sure that was an element of it. We certainly know, if we look back into queer studies and queer theory, that has been a long running theme of kind of a particularly American academia, that all of these things have always been seen as a kind of a continuous coherent struggle, that the struggle for Palestine would also reflect the struggle for queer liberation in America. So what was different then about 2020? When you say these things came together in a new way?
Well, because, for a start, if you talk about intersectionality, they had a point. Like, that's the thing, when you go back to Kimberly Crenshaw and the various academics who began critical race theory, or became known as critical race theory in the sort of legal departments of universities, the point was pretty valid. I mean, the example that was given, Kimberly Crenshaw wrote about the case of General Motors, and she was talking about a legal case that took place. And what she was saying was, General Motors was making the claim that it wasn't racist, and they were saying, look, we have all these black men working for us, we're not racist, and we're not misogynist, because look, we have all these women, but they didn't have black women. And there was the sense that black women were falling through the cracks. In other words, they were at the intersection of two different forms of discrimination, and that was real, and they had a point. And as Kimberly Crenshaw herself has pointed out, what that idea of intersectionality has become is not what she originally envisaged. Now it has become a kind of means to accrue power through victimhood by competing on a kind of oppression.
There's an inverse power structure by which the biggest victim has the greatest power in society.
Well, we can prove it. I mean, we know, for instance, that there was that recent study in America of young Christians, actually, people between the ages of 18 and 26, I think. So it was something like 40% identified as LGBTQ+. Okay? Now, statistically, most of those people are going to be straight. They just are.
Yeah.
Which means that LGBTQ...
Unless it was a very, very gay few years.
Maybe it was a big gap, maybe something in the water or something. But effectively what you have is LGBTQ+ is now a predominantly heterosexual movement. Pride is now predominantly a heterosexual festival. A lot of it is just straight people with a kink, identifying into an oppressed class. They want to be part of the Q+ bracket. And, it's like when Dannii Minogue said recently that she was queer, and then she had to clarify, I mean, I don't actually sleep with women. Oh, OK, then. So you're not, in fact, queer, are you? and similarly with, who was it? It was a politician's daughter in America who came out as I think it was the Cuomo, it was Cuomo's daughter, came out as a demisexual.
It's one of my favourites.
Demisexual just means, I mean, you may not know, like demisexual means that you are sexually attracted, you're attracted to people if you have an emotional connection.
You're a woman, basically, is what you've discovered.
A woman. An old-fashioned heterosexual you've come out as. Like that,
you're conservative.
You're conservative.
You're conservative.
And that's radical, right? So suddenly you can say, I'm oppressed, or asexuals, give me a fucking break. Right, so do you know about asexuals? So asexuals, and they have a word for it, they say, they've accused me of being ace-phobic. Right?
Ace-phobic,
right?
Oh no.
So there's who's that activist she's the asexual activist. She was recently leading the Pride Parade in London, and she's waving this flag, dressed in a very sexualised dominatrix outfit.
That's always the way.
But apparently she doesn't have a sex drive. But she was there waving a flag, and I'm like, no one cares about who you don't want to sleep with, you narcissist. No one cares. Like, you're not oppressed. No one was ever burnt at the stake for not wanting to have sex. It's not a thing. And that's kind of... It's hugely insulting to like gay people who've actually, there's actually a history of gay oppression, right?
And gay bashing. There's not that much ace bashing around, is there?
How would you even do it? Would you go around sort of showing pornography to people to see if they get aroused?
Yeah.
And if they don't, like, if you've got a low libido, just go to your GP. You don't need to wave a flag at a pride parade.
So when we speak about this kind of inversion of the power structure, the way in which the victim starts to be venerated, give me some more kind of egregious examples in the 2020s. Like, what do you think are the epitomes of this woke excess?
It's kind of difficult. I mean, the actual epitomes are really quite serious because then you're going down the road of like children being mutilated for being gender non-conforming, women being sexually assaulted because male rapists have been moved into their prisons. So actually, the excesses of the woke movement are really damaging, like properly destruction of people's lives, destruction of people's careers. And then you've got the more frivolous everyday stuff, which always sounds silly, like the announcement of pronouns, people expecting you to declare fealty to their God at the beginning of meetings. Or, you know, I've got actor friends who, they can't get cast really because when they have a rehearsal process, if they go around and say the pronouns, well, they won't do it. So it's an unofficial thing, then they don't get cast next time because they didn't declare their fealty to the god of whatever it might be.
And is this how the kind of, you know, because I think to some, especially to those maybe on the left, progressives, it seems conspiratorial to think, look, in these rooms, in these rehearsal rooms, these anti-woke people are being victimised and abused, and it sounds self-victimising even to come round the other way.
Yes.
To say that you are being discriminated against for not saying pronouns. But is this what you're kind of describing? There's a kind of quiet level of ousting of these people?
Yeah, it's a coercive thing. Sometimes it's direct. There's the case of Fran Itkoff, who was a volunteer for the Multiple Sclerosis Society, and she was an elderly volunteer, had worked with them for decades, and she just said, I've been asked to put pronouns on my email, I don't understand why, I don't understand what this is. You know, because, you know, she was 80 or whatever, and they kicked her out. They actually got rid of her. You know, this is what I mean. Like, it is... Or you've got...
Sorry, MS patients. Guess you won't be enjoying her help anymore.
Exactly. So, but the coercive stuff is kind of key, because when you ask someone to declare their pronouns, what you're saying is, I believe in this thing called gender identity, this esoteric gendered soul, and I want you to declare that you also believe in my religion. That's what it is. So it is incredibly coercive, and it shouldn't happen at all. And it is true that people who refused to go along with this, you know, it's subtle. You're not going to get promoted in the way that someone else might. You know, it's very insidious, I would say. So although it does seem frivolous, it does seem stupid, even the really stupid stories have a kind of dark edge. You know, if you take someone like Robin DiAngelo, I don't know if you know Robin DiAngelo, she's the author of White Fragility, which has the distinction of being one of the worst books ever written. I don't know if you've read it. And this is a middle-aged white woman lecturing everyone about race. And she got paid something like 12 grand an hour to go into corporations to berate people for being white. And you know, there was a leaked screenshot from one of her training sessions. It was at Coca-Cola, actually. And on the board, it said, try to be less white. That was the takeaway, try to be... I don't know how you do that. Like bronzing pearls or what, I don't know how you do that. But that was there, that was on the screen. She was getting paid a fortune for this. And the entire thesis of her book is that all white people are racist and complicit in white supremacy, and if they deny it, that is evidence that they are racist and complicit in white supremacy. Kafka trap, witch trial. And the whole book was about her talking about how racist she was. You know, a lot of it was her admitting to her racism, but instead of reflecting on that and saying, oh, maybe I've got a problem, she was saying, oh, this just means that all white people are like this. It's innate. What a great excuse. And she made an absolute fortune, won't do interviews. I mean, I know she got gold by Matt Walsh in that film, but she because he wore a man bun or whatever. But, you know, she's not the smartest, you know. But she will never be challenged on this stuff. Similarly, Stonewall pushing their no debate strategy. Well, yeah, it's very wise actually to say we're not going to debate it if your position is that human beings can change sex, which is factually wrong. So obviously, it's like saying we're going to deny gravity but not have a debate about it, because of course, you know. So yeah, there's the insidious element to the humorous element. I suppose that's what I mean, and that is different from the political correctness movement. We never saw anything quite as extreme as what went on in our time. I mean,
so yeah, Robin DiAngelo there now is very much absent from the New York Times bestseller list now.
Yes. Well, she just had, her last book was Nice Racism, which includes a bit where she says, stop smiling at black people. It's really patronising. It's a form of coercive. Like, shut up.
Oh, that's so good.
Don't be nice to black people in the name of anti-racism. Give me a break.
But that book has obviously not found the success of white fragility.
No.
Clearly. And if you think about Stonewall seems to have very much lost its grip on a lot of the institutions and committees where it had a real seat at the table in years previous. So we must have met some sort of turn in the road. Something has happened. What has happened, according to you? Because, of course, your book is called The End of Woke. So, you know, it's not the end of woke question mark. It's the end of woke. Well, there isn't even a full stop there, I noticed. But
No. I can't believe you're criticising my punctuation.
Well, it's just, you know.
But, well, the thing is, the question mark is implied.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. That's my suggestion, yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's more aspirational.
Right, yes.
Although that said, you know, I mean, the argument I make in the book is that too many seismic things have now happened that we're not going to return to what woke was.
We can't have the heady days back where we all were, you know, black squaring, reading white fragility.
No, exactly. That's not going to happen.
Loving it.
Yeah. Reading white fragility on the tube.
I was loving it.
Yeah, of course.
I was loving it, obviously.
I don't think that we can go back there. I think too many major things have happened. Some of the examples I give in the book are the Supreme Court ruling, which clarifies that sex in the Equality Act means sex, as opposed to something else. And then, of course, you've got the Cass Review, which has led to the banning of puberty blockers in the UK by Wes Streeting, by the way, Health Secretary, who once believed in gender identity ideology, has a complete turnaround there because he's listened to the arguments. He didn't go along with the no debate strategy. So that's happened. Donald Trump in America has obviously signed his various executive orders. You know, men shouldn't be in women's prisons, men shouldn't be in women's sports. He was really elected on an anti-woke ticket quite explicitly. So for all these people who say the culture war doesn't matter, you know, it actually wins and loses elections. That's what it does. You know, the significant advertisement on the Trump team was the one about gender. It was where Kamala Harris had spoken about how she wanted to support the transition of prisoners. And Donald Trump's advertising campaign came up with the slogan that Kamala Harris is for they, them, Donald Trump is for you. And it was, and there was a group called Future Forward, I think, who was a Democrat, you know, no fan of Trump, a Democrat research body, who found that advert actuated a 2.7 shift in favour of Trump among people who saw it. That's huge. I mean, that in such a closely run election, that could swing it. So this was a culture war election. And he went in there and all of these, you know, that famous, I opened the book with this, but that famous scene of him in the White House surrounded by women and girls signing this executive order saying men should not be in women's sports. It's a no-brainer. Even the majority of Democrats supported that. Donald Trump, someone who's been accused of misogyny repeatedly, signing the most pro-feminist directive you can imagine, surrounded by women and girls, you know, signing something that is approved by the right and the left, a unifying cause. So, you know, it's all of this has happened. We've had, what else have we had? DEI, completely scaled back, diversity, equity and inclusion policies, going out of Facebook and Walmart and Google, Amazon, McDonald's, you know, all the big ones. So all of that is being scaled back. So I think at this point, it can't go back to what it was.
You're emphasising there, though, that it's not just a right backlash.
Yes.
You're mentioning, you know, Wes Streeting and Democrats there who would have agreed with that scaling back of DEI. So it's not, in your opinion, a kind of right-wing attack on wokeness that has happened.
I think the culture war has always been misinterpreted as a left versus right issue. I don't think it's got anything to do with it. I think the culture war is to do with what John Stuart Mill writes about in On Liberty, which is that struggle between those who value liberty and those who believe in authoritarianism. And that's always been the conflict. And of course, there are authoritarians on all sides of the political spectrum. So I've never bought this idea that what it means to essentially be woke, which is to, you know, seek cultural change through authoritarian imposition, through this lens of group identity monomania. That's something that exists on the left and the right. And I think because we persisted in talking about this as being right-wingers versus left-wingers, we just completely misapprehended it. I mean, if it really was the case that this was the anti-woke movement is a right-wing movement, why is it that all of the major excesses of the woke movement were presided over by the Tories in this country? You couldn't vote them out. This wasn't a thing that you could get rid of. It was something that was just baked in. It was baked into all of the quangos and all of the various government departments, the NHS, the army, the police, academia, teaching. It was just ubiquitous, and it was ubiquitous amongst the powerful. So to just say, oh, well, this is just about right and left, it means you don't understand the issue. I mean, one of the examples I give in the book is Theresa May. Theresa May wrote an autobiography a couple of years ago where she calls herself woke and proud. And she says that, well, all that woke means is to be alert to injustice and racism. So therefore I'm woke. And I also quote Kathy Burke, who's very, very left-wing, no fan of Theresa May, saying precisely the same thing. Now, if you just thought that woke meant that, well, we'd all be woke. We'd all be happy with that. But once you've been dogpiled by woke activists online who are threatening to kill you, the ones who send rape and death threats to J.K. Rowling, you suddenly realise it's not about being compassionate. These aren't the good guys here. These aren't the people on the right side of history. These are quite cruel, vicious and ferocious activists who will bully and humiliate and intimidate you until they get their way. I mean, they know they can't cancel J.K. Rowling, but they also know they can put out a strong message to anyone who's going to support J.K. Rowling. And that's why this has lasted as long as it has. So I just don't buy the right-left thing. I don't think that's relevant.
You say that it was in so many ways baked in. And I suppose the next question has to be how do you unbake? You can't unbake a cake.
No.
You know, what do you do once this kind of woke culture war is baked into institutions? It seems in the US, at least, that private companies have been able to overturn this stuff much quicker because they have the kind of power and autonomy to decide very quickly, like, let's just, you know, scrap all of that DEI hiring business that we brought in a few years ago. But there are going to be institutions, whether that's, you know, museums or governments, where actually this stuff is buried much deeper. And of course, some in the Trump government have advocated for a kind of burn it down policy, where you really do take a sledgehammer to those institutions and say, look, I'm sorry, it's just baked in, we're going to have to kill it.
Yeah.
What do you feel about that? Where do you stand on that kind of argument of the complete destruction of the rotten institutions versus rehabilitation?
I do know what you mean, and I know a lot of people I respect deeply who say that, for instance, higher education is gone, it's lost, and you have to just ditch those institutions and create new ones. You know, I mean, and we've got, you know, the University of Austin at Texas, or Ralston College in Savannah. Like, so that's what I mean. I think you should start.
So they are suffering from their own internal problems now
at Texas
because
they are, yes.
of the, you know, the schism that Trump has created in so many ways.
So I do think it's difficult. I mean, I don't think just absolutely just, you know, scorched earth. You know, I don't think the woke were so successful that their influence cannot be unpicked. I mean, I might be being very optimistic here, but I think on the whole that is the case. I think, for instance, we could do something about the problems in the NHS. You know, we have identified that there's an issue here. We have, you know, the National Health Service has bought into a pseudoscientific belief system and has modified its policies accordingly. That's not a sustainable position. You know, we know that, for instance, when there was a sexual assault in a hospital in London, police turned up and said, we need to investigate this. And the staff said it couldn't be the case because there was no men on that ward. What they meant is there was a man who identified as a woman, but NHS policy is to not call that person a man. That's very serious, because then you're dealing with the area of sexual assault and denial and obfuscation around a police investigation. Now, that sort of thing can be resolved with the will, but where is the will? I mean, for instance, at the moment, pretty much all the quangos, the civil service, we know from whistleblowers at the civil service that the machinery of government is endemically woke. The BBC is absolutely completely endemically woke. I mean, I take the view that the BBC does a pretty good job of party politics. They will hold both Labour and Tory to account, but when it comes to ideology, they are hopelessly lost. They've got a gender identity unit. Do you know about this gender identity unit, right? Or I think it's just an identity unit, right? They have a gender identity correspondent, which is, you know, like having a transubstantiation correspondent, which they don't have. Like, so it's so far in, and I know from talking to people who work at the BBC, they agree that it's too far gone there. Like, I don't think that really, maybe it can be saved, but it would take the political will to do it. So, for instance, with the College of Policing, which is the quango that trains police officers in England and Wales, this is a group that arbitrarily introduced the idea of non-crime hate incidents in 2015, and they said the police should be wasting their time investigating non-crime and recording non-crime. And of course, and by the way, and I'm not necessarily suggesting causality, but the head of the College of Policing at the time had the year before won Stonewall's top award. So I'm just saying, coincidence maybe, yeah. But what I'm really pointing to is activist capture. So you have an activist body now training the police. Are we really that surprised that 6 police officers will turn up and go through someone's bookshelves and make comments about the book? or arrest. You know, they locked that man in a cell for 8 hours for a tweet that was against anti-Semitism that they simply misunderstood. You know, are we really surprised that this is happening again and again? I mean, I did a big thread on X about the moments where police have investigated or arrested or even prosecuted people for wrongthink, and it's getting out of control. I mean, I think the last Times report found that 12,000 a year, roughly, people are arrested for offensive speech. That shouldn't happen in a free society. And I know some of those will be connected to harassment and other legitimate criminal activity, but a lot of it will just be things that have caused offence. The Crown Prosecution Guidelines, the official government guidelines, the College of Policing Guidelines, always talk about, you know, hate incidents are defined by whether the victim, and remember, we don't say complainant, we say victim, thanks to Keir Starmer's tenure as Director of Public Prosecutions. We ignore due process linguistically and rhetorically, and we say that the victim perceives that something was motivated by hatred against a protected characteristic. No evidential threshold is required. No evidence at all. You and I almost certainly have non-crime hate incidents recorded against our name. I haven't checked, because I don't want to know, but I'm sure that, you know, bear in mind, people have been slapped with non-crime hate incidents for whistling the Bob the Builder theme tune, for a line call in a tennis match that went wrong. Some school child got it for calling a classmate a retard. Some other kid got it for saying her friend smelt of fish. So, you know, and this is all, it's on the record. Now, that sounds silly and frivolous, but then what if you apply for a job as a teacher and suddenly your disclosure barring service check flags up that you've got a non-crime hate incident and you just don't get that job? But that is what would happen. So there's actual real world consequences, quite apart from the principle that the police should not be auditing your emotions or investigating you for wrongthink. Like, that's the key. And yet how many times have we heard politicians say we need to scrap non-crime hate incidents? Well, we had 2 Home Secretaries telling the College of Policing, stop it. You're not allowed to do this anymore. We had the High Court telling the College of Policing that this has a chilling effect on freedom of expression and they should stop it. So we have an activist body training police who ignores instructions from the Home Office, successive instructions, ignores the courts, and just does whatever the hell it wants, which is why you end up with a police officer dragging an autistic child into a police van because she said, you look like my lesbian nana. And the footage is disturbing because the child is screaming, hitting, you know, himself in the face or herself. I can't remember the gender of the child, but it's distressing to watch, and all because it was perceived to be offensive against a protected characteristic. Now, what I would suggest is scrap the College of Policing. Just get rid of it. It's not fit for purpose.
So you are quite burn it down with this?
With that, because I don't think that can be saved. But that, you see, can be replaced with something fit for purpose. But there's no political will. Like, you can't scrap Oxford and Cambridge University. You can't bulldoze the Radcliffe camera.
No.
You know, I mean, no, it's too nice. It's too nice.
Of course not.
But you can do something about ensuring that the people in control of these institutions are unpicking this stuff. I'm not saying it's easy. No. And in the book, I'm making the argument that this is years, it's going to be years before all of this stuff gets rectified.
We're going to switch off our live stream cameras for non-subscribers. So if you want to continue watching, you're going to have to subscribe now. But because I want to ask you about how we avoid... Well, folks, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for with this free preview. If you want to see the rest of our event with the brilliant Andrew Doyle, that includes the audience Q&A that you can take part in, then all you have to do is become a subscriber to UnHerd. It's really that easy. Just go to unherd.com/live, and it's only £3 for the first 3 months. Now, I think that's a pretty good deal if you ask me. Become a subscriber and get everything that UnHerd has to offer.